All right. Hello and welcome to session 2A, taking stock to take action, using survey data to develop both statewide and local initiatives for LAMs. This session is being sponsored by Hollinger. I'm Allison Neely and I'm a member of the MAC 2021 Program Committee. Before I turn it over to our session presenters, I'd like to go over a few logistical details. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available for viewing in approximately 2 weeks. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to submit your questions. This session also has the chat feature enabled, which you are free to use to make comments or share relevant information with your colleagues, but try to direct questions to the Q&A so they are not missed. I will be sharing MAC's expectations for conduct during the session. By participating in the session, you agree to engage respectfully with the presenter and other session participants. Any type of harassing or disruptive behavior is prohibited, including but not limited to abusive or derogatory comments or slurs, threats of or acts of violence, intimidation, misgendering, or excessive comments not pertinent to the topic at hand. We will be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and if anyone engages in harassing or disruptive behavior, that person will be removed. I wish to thank you for following these guidelines. Finally, you are welcome and encouraged to share your conference experiences via social media. I will be adding to the chat the suggested conference hashtags in just a minute or two. And thank you, and I will now turn things over to our presenters.
Can everybody see the screen okay? All right, so thanks for joining us for our presentation, Taking Stock to Take Action, using survey data to develop both statewide and local initiatives for LAMs and the creation of the Ohio Digitization Registry project. Just as a note, sorry, the bit link at the bottom, we will be referencing quite a bit. So if you guys want to open that on your computers to follow along, you're more than welcome to. My name is Rachel Senese. I'm the Digital Projects Coordinator at Georgia State University. I am formerly the Digital Library Coordinator at Cleveland Public Library. So that's why I'm involved in an Ohio-based project.
Hi, and I am Janet Carleton. I'm the Digital Initiatives Coordinator for Ohio University Libraries, where I work on digitization, access, and digital preservation of the library's unique resources, as well as promoting their use through social media. For transparency's sake, I'm also a member of the State Library Ohio Board, but I'm not presenting in my board capacity today, and the board was not directly involved in this project. Instead, I'm wearing my Ohio DIG Planning Committee hat and Friend of Rachel hat. As a matter of fact, the informal name of this project amongst ourselves is the Rachel Project. Next.
Thanks, Janet.
So I'm going to do a quick outline to tell you what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to go over kind of the landscape of Ohio cultural heritage briefly, the topic in question, survey design, survey results, the Ohio Digitization Registry project, and lessons learned. Next, yes, very good. The next few slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly. They're really just an idea to give you an idea of the wide landscape of cultural heritage consortium organizations and groups in Ohio. So we can start off, I'm not going to read these, but you can see we've got Ohio Memory and Ohio Link and the State Library, and on it goes. There's also the DigiHubs, ORAB, Ohio Digital Network. And then there's the mini Ohio Cultural Heritage Groups, everybody from the county records managers to the catalogers who deal with digital items, these to the Society of Ohio Archivists, and on and on. We like our cultural heritage groups in Ohio. And then we have some more informal ones. One of those is Ohio DIG. Then we've got regional city roundtables. And then we even have some user groups within the state for Content TM, Phase 1 cameras. And next, I'm going to talk about the partners. We're going to go a little more in depth now. That was just to give you an idea of what's out there. And we'll say more later why that was important. So the two main partners for this project were the State Library of Ohio and Ohio DIG. And to reference, I know state libraries are different in different states. In Ohio, the State Library is an agency that serves state government, but also serves all types of libraries and residents. And the State Library really has a history of a drive to support digitization in the state, with major projects such as the DigiHubs, and later stepping up to host the state DPLA hub, which is called the Ohio Digital Network. The DigiHubs was an LSTA grant to the 4 largest public library systems for equipment to support regional cultural heritage digitization. Next. And an illustration of how important digitization is to the state library. IMLS, which is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, federal agency, which provides some of the funding to SLO, and particularly pass-through funds for public libraries and grant funding, requires a 5-year plan that really reflects what the library and its community finds important. There's only 4 goals on the current state 5-year plan, and goal 3 is really to support digitization, to facilitate discovery and knowledge. And then our other partner, next Rachel, is the Ohio Digitization Interest Group. So Ohio Dig is a very informal group. There's no real membership. There's no charge. There's an informal planning group. And it's really just a discussion group for archivists, librarians, and others interested in digitization, digital preservation, and access of cultural heritage materials. It started in 2005. It had kind of a 5-year lapse, but we've been meeting 6 times a year since November 2013. That's a lot of meetings. We often have 40 or more people. So we're not talking like an 8-person meeting. These are meetings where people come from all over the state to come together to form a community of folks interested in these areas. We have been virtual for a year now. And one of the things that I think is the neatest about Ohio Dig is how the membership cuts across the institution types. I mean, we have vendors, we have public library people, which is pretty different than some of the groups that I showed you earlier that are like, they're academic, or they're just local government records folks, or they're museum folks. So one of the great things about Ohio Dig is that we can all get together and share that. One other note, the Ohio Dig community doesn't agree on how to pronounce our name. You're going to hear Rachel say Ohio Dig, like with a shovel, whereas I say Ohio Dig, as in digitization.
I can't help it, Janet.
I know.
I can't help it.
All right.
So
Rachel, go ahead.
So one of the most popular questions that we hear across any one of the meetings across the entire list of organizations across Ohio, but especially at Ohio Dig, is, so what do you do at your institution, or how do you do something at your institution? And that question really got me thinking, especially when it comes to digitization, because what do other people's do when they're doing digitization? What are they using? What other software are they using? And when I'm at conferences, I always ask other institutions that are of similar size, so what do you have? Because librarians are nosy and we all want to know. So I was thinking on this question for a while, and I decided to email John and email Janet. So John DeWeese is also one of our partners on the project. You probably saw him in the chat. He also has a poster, so please go see his poster during MAC. But I emailed them and just said, hey, what are your thoughts about creating a registry of all of the digitization equipment in Ohio? So that way people know what everybody else has. We can facilitate conversations and know who to ask when we have questions about equipment that we're using. I also posed it as a possible thing that we can carry on through other various regions. And they were like, all right, we'll hop on board. And that's how the informal Rachel project title came to be. Through our various discussions on how we would do this, we decided that we wanted to pull in Jen Johnson, who is at the State Library, because as you guys can tell, our state library is very heavily involved in digitization. And so we thought that she would also have some insight. And that's kind of how our collaboration was born. We knew that we wanted to do a survey, but initially a lot of our concerns were who's going to take us seriously, because we're just a couple of archivists throwing out a survey out there. And I know when we're inundated and we're all working from home, you don't want to do another survey if you don't have to. We also had concerns about how are we going to formulate the survey? What platforms are we going to use? How are we going to design it? Are we going to be able to do any data parsing if we do a free version versus a paid version? If we do a paid version, who's going to pay for it? So after our conversation with Jen Johnson, she also said, hey, we're getting ready to do our own survey. So because they're closely related, they can come together. And so Jen said that the State Library would construct and disseminate the survey. And that they would include our questions that we wanted to ask. They would also do data cleanup for us since they already intended to do that. We said we would be the guinea pigs to do the initial testing on the survey to make sure that it actually worked properly and that there weren't any kinks going on in there. We would get anonymized data since it was a survey from the State Library. They did not feel comfortable giving us all the information about the institutions that participated, which we were fine with. And OHDIG didn't actually come in until later on after we got the data. I was thinking that we were going to do our own website on like a wiki pages or a WordPress and publicize the data there, since it was hopefully going to go cross-regionally. But after we got the data back, we realized there's a lot more work that we have to do in Ohio than we originally anticipated. And the best place for this to sit and live is in OHDIG. Janet?
Yes. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what SLO's goals were for this survey. And I pulled this from the 2020 Digital Collection Survey Brief Report that Jen Johnson put out. And we're going to discuss this through the rest of the presentation. So where SLO is going with the goals were to ascertain for this work in the Ohio Cultural Heritage Organization's current and projected future use, work, level of budgetary funding and staffing, the most popular equipment, software, and vendor services, which was actually ours more than theirs, but and the support that cultural heritage orgs would like to see from SLO to help them work through. Next one, Rachel. The creation of that 5-year plan that I mentioned earlier. It's about time to do that next 5-year plan for IMLS, which IMLS has to approve it. And we have to show that this is what the community really wants and needs. So also Jen's job is split between being the digitization consultant for SLO to all the public libraries that request it, and also running the Ohio Digital Network, which is the DPLA hub. So it was going to inform more programmatic goals for them.
And from our side of the goals for the survey, as I've said before, we wanted to create this registry of equipment and software being used within the state, to create that network for equipment help and communicate and just say, hey, I'm thinking about buying this equipment, or I'm using the software. What are your thoughts? And also to identify different institutional workflows utilizing similar equipment. Because I know when I was in Cleveland, I used different capture software on a similar piece of equipment that Columbus did. So that was something else I wanted to capture, just to show that there are other possibilities instead of just using the software given. The second bullet was actually something that became a goal after we got the survey data, because we realized that we needed to take stock of everybody else's digitization capabilities, and also to meet their needs as well, and to help them look for possible partners. And then again, hopefully we're going to expand this to nationwide and incorporate different regions. So as we were taking into consideration our goals and just talking about all the concerns that we had as archivists, and had these conversations with Jen, we decided to work on the survey design together. The state library decided to use Microsoft Forms, which is actually a very smart thing to do because of how it's formatted, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But we also decided, or I should say, SLO decided to repeat some questions from a 2015 survey that they did. The 2015 survey was before our DPLA hub was created. So it was to kind of take stock of where Ohio was at the time and how prepared we were to incorporate our records into DPLA. The 2020 survey was more to see how different institutions are sitting now and the next stage for digitization. And so it's also geared more towards digital preservation as well. There were 33 questions in total. And this slide just shows some of the questions that were from the 2015 survey. And then on the right is actually our working document for the questions that we wanted to ask for our purposes. From the 2015 survey, questions 1 through 6, 10, and 13 were all incorporated into the 2020 survey in various forms. So the final product of our survey was divided into 5 sections. The first one was institutional information. The second one was the digitization program, which you can see on the right. The questions there are not the ones that we as the archivist asked, but they were still very important for our project going forward. And then there was the digital collections section, which is a continuation of digitization. We kind of looked at it as a workflow. And then section 4 was digital preservation, and 5 was the closing section where it was open-ended and they just asked, what do you want to see from us going forward? So this slide shows a screenshot of just what the digital collections form looked like and the digital preservation section. The great thing about them being different sections is that if some of the institutions that weren't doing digital preservation or weren't doing digitization in-house, they could just say no and then move on to the next section instead of having to go through all 33 of the questions that were being asked. Jana?
So for the survey implementation, it was sent, the State Library sent it out on November 5th for World Digital Preservation Day. A reminder was set December 1st and the survey closed December 31st. Now we'll talk about this later, but you might notice something about that. That's basically winter holiday time in a pandemic. So, and we'll talk about that later, but right now I'm going to include a little survey feedback from participants, feedback to help us with our future surveys, survey fatigue, you can imagine. So one person said it took 22 minutes, but they already had a list of their hardware and software in use, and we could see how, particularly if you were working from home, it was going to be pretty hard for you to come up with a definitive list of what versions of software. And maybe, you know, I've got 4 different Epson Expression XLs and I can't remember, are they all 10s? Do I have 2 11s? Do I have 1 12? So there was that. Next, a little more on the survey implementation feedback. You know, one of the hardest questions is what was the total number of items your institution has digitized? Because it wasn't asked, do they mean online or do they just mean digitized? And, you know, that person felt it should have said, it's okay to be approximate, you know, don't try to get the really exact numbers. And then the software list was super long. So that was kind of overwhelming for them. And next, yes. So the State Library of Ohio report, the digital collections survey brief report, which we mentioned earlier, we're going to dig into a little more here. It was a 4-page summary by Jen Johnson, and we have it linked to on the ODERP, as we say. If we're not saying Rachel Project, we say ODERP, the ODERP site. And you can see it there along as well as the 2015 survey that was looking for readiness for DPLA. Next. So analyzing the data, we had 104 respondents, the bulk of which were public. And, you know, again, it was during a pandemic and it was during the winter holidays. So we've got 59 public, 26 academic, 9 other special, 7 historical societies, and 3 museums. And I think there's 151 public libraries in Ohio, and I forgot, maybe 88. No, that's the member counties. There are a lot of academic institutions too. So yeah, we got a small subsection, but still a section. Next, Rachel. Of the 104 that replied, 65 of them were digitizing and 67 were creating digital collections. And I can only think that the difference of 2 between 65 and 67 is maybe they were outsourcing, so they didn't consider it that they were digitizing themselves. And as far as what formats most were going, 52 were doing photographs, 38 analog video. That's actually, I thought that was high. 33 printed manuscripts, 32 text and manuscripts, and 29 bound volumes. And those those that weren't digitizing, 37% of the respondents were not digitizing. Of that 37%, 33 planned to begin in the next 5 years. And what they were saying would really help them would be more funding, of course, and training, because not only they figure where are they going to get the money and the staff, but where do we begin? And that's where we hope we're going to help folks. And yes, so hardware and software were things that we, as in the archivist, OHDIG folks, were particularly interested in, because we thought that was somewhere that we could help. If we found out what folks were using, we could help provide workflows. They could help provide workflows. We would figure out if you needed a particular piece of equipment, where you might be able to get some help with it. The top 5, Epson, that's probably a no-brainer. ScanPro, Bookeye, Canon, Zoyshel. And then there were additional 15 that only one institution was using, like each one of those was only being used by one institution. And we have those spreadsheets on the ODERP website, so you can actually look at it and you can see what folks were using. Next, as far as software, the software was more of a grouping, not so widely dispersed. So Photoshop is top, Acrobat, Adobe, Bridge, GIMP, and FrontView. And then again, 7 were reported only by a single institution, and spreadsheet at the ODERP website. Rachel?
So we also combed through all of the comments that were left from the survey recipients, because we wanted to see, like, are we on point with what we're thinking of trying to create, which was the registry of hardware and software. And I pulled together just some of the comments that were most related to what we were interested in, and just in the realm of digitization. And the ones that were italicized were really the ones that were interesting to us. So more webinars and training sessions on software, creating a clearinghouse of sorts to find out what others are doing and best practices. Loved that one because that was really where we were headed. Instruction on methods, equipment, procedures, and policies. They also wanted somebody to serve as a go-to for questions about best practices and standards. And then again, more training. We also had other things that people brought up. I'd love to see continued support for professionals in this situation as they're managing their digitization efforts, and it's not the only thing that that person was doing. And they might need some assistance with basic questions and processes. Some examples of digitizing plans from other libraries. And one thing that we were really happy to see was statewide initiatives and events such as OHDIG meetings are important to us. So that really played a part in deciding to put our project on OHDIG as well. And a lot of these comments that we received in the feedback, especially wanting to see examples of digitization plans from other institutions, really made us think that, okay, we don't just want this registry, as Janet said, we really should incorporate more of the workflows to show, hey, this is how you do things too, and how different institutions do them. So there's not just one right way to do it. It's okay to have multiple versions. So that's how we created the OHDIG project. So these are just two screen grabs of the site. Again, there's the bit link that you can see. On here, we have links to the survey results for hardware and software. We put together some spreadsheets with all of that data, which I'll show you a couple of screenshots of it, as well as the software. And then we started to talk amongst ourselves to figure out, okay, based off of the top 5 pieces of hardware that people are using, what workflows and policies and procedures could we put out to get everybody started? So that's how we ended up starting with the Epson documentation. We also started with Adobe Bridge and Photoshop to process files, since Adobe products took up the top slot with all of the software. And then we also used Opus. We also provided the Opus FreeFlow software for using with Bookeyes. And so these are just some of the screenshots of what our data actually looks like. It was very interesting to see where everybody was falling. As Jan said, absence, of course, are the number ones. John put in there that 57.9% of organizations that responded were using absence. A little surprised by how many Konica Minolta ones. There was only one Curtas that we could see, which was a little surprising. There were some organizations that knew I have a Canon, but I don't know what it is. So they would just say, we have Canon. And in the survey, when we were just trying to figure out how to design it, we ended up leaving it open that way because some people just may not know. We thought about trying to narrow it down and have different models with the manufacturer, but we decided that's a little bit overkill and would be a little overwhelming, especially since one of the survey participants kind of validated that by saying that the software list was really overwhelming. So to try and include all those models to help jog people's memories would have been counterproductive. And then on the right, you'll see the full list of software that people responded. We had a much larger list than that, but those are the only ones that people were using. None of us knew what Square 9 was, so that was kind of a surprising one. But everything else we kind of anticipated. And then here are some screen captures of the different processes that we put online so that people can use them for reference. We also are in the process of developing ones for scanning 35mm slides using a camera stand. We will be using the institution information and the size of the institutions to determine which institutions we want to ask to help us provide more of these workflows, since we can't do it all on our own. And we figured that some of the institutions that we know have popular equipment that probably have internal documentation will be able to ask. We don't actually know who those institutions are, but the state library said that they would be willing to ask on our behalf.
Rachel?
Yep.
I just, realized that I didn't have on my slide, which I think I was supposed to. Sorry. One of the reasons why we are focusing on like the name brand software and hardware was because that was something that the state library really isn't allowed to do. They have on their website, they have a lot of resources that link to more general things like FADGI and some well-known sites, but they are continually asked by public libraries, what should we buy? What's everybody else using? And they are not allowed to do that. So that was a place that we could step up as an organization that didn't have those kind of strictures.
I'm glad you remember that, Janet, because I also forgot about that part. And that was something that we really wanted to emphasize. The state library can link to the OHDIG website as a resource for people to use, but again, they can't actually put any of these on their website. So some of our future plans that we've talked about so far is including state region information within the data of where the equipment is. So that way that smaller institutions can see, okay, there's a book scanner or there's a larger oversized format scanner in my region. This information is available for the DigiHubs on the state website, but not all smaller institutions can actually get to the DigiHubs because they can't drive that far, they can't take their collections that far, or they're just not trusting of some of the larger institutions because they're large institutions, but they do have relationship with their local colleges or their other local libraries as well. So we wanted to make sure that we got that regional information out. We haven't been able to get that data yet. We are still waiting on that one, so that's why it's not incorporated yet. We are also going to be adding in more information about digital collection platforms, just so people can also see what the digital collections platforms are across the state of Ohio. We also have discussed in the future creating video tutorials, since video tutorials were something that institutions had asked for. So they will have the printed copy of how to do things, but also a video one as well. We're also going to put out a call to our institutions after we do our targeted list to see who can provide what tutorials, to ask if anybody would be willing to provide what they do. So it would also be beneficial for some of our smaller institutions to show, hey, it's okay to not do everything. This is what we do. We also want institutions hopefully to claim their equipment. So that way we have not just the regional information, but actually who has it. So we can actually say, oh, hey, Ohio University has this Epson, or they have this phase 1 camera. Let me talk to them. And we can also use that information to also create partnerships for those smaller institutions to say, okay, this is what your needs are. This is who you can talk to. We'll be doing a presentation of this at OHDIG in September. Their schedule's already full, so September was the first time we could get in. We're also going to be talking about repeating the survey post-pandemic once everybody is back in their office because of some of the trials and tribulations that we found with the lower than anticipated participation within the survey. And some of the lessons that we learned, when working with a partner institution, you lose control of some of the design. We were okay with this, but we also kind of lost some of the functionality that we were hoping to. We actually missed one of our planned questions and we didn't catch it, which was a little bit of a bummer on our part. We had intended to ask for the capture software, and that never made it into the survey. So that's also part of the reason why when we lost the ability to actually create it, we lost the ability to make sure that it was there. And because everybody was working and trying to navigate working remotely and trying to get everything done, when we were doing our testing, we didn't catch it. The pandemic actually pushed the survey back about 6 months. We designed it in March, April, May, but it didn't get released until February just because things happen in the pandemic and working from home. Things ended up going slower. So that was a little unfortunate, especially because it did fall at the end of the academic year or financial year, and it was around the holidays. This also was a leading factor, we think, in the fact that we had less academic involvement because no one really was in their office from the academic side. From the public side, people were still in their offices. They went back first, and then as an academic institution, we're still not going back full time. And the information wasn't as detailed as we anticipated, probably because no one was in their offices to verify that information. And then our mistakes, we missed some of our planned questions. As I said, the timing of the survey was not the greatest. And we wished that we had another neutral party that wasn't so close, proofread it to catch the fact that we were missing some of the intended information that we were trying to capture. Excuse me. And then we have some suggestions for you guys as you do your own surveys.
Rachel, do you want me to?
Yeah, can you take a moment?
Give your voice a break. So speaking of, neutral proofreaders, it's really important. And I know that's listed in everything on what you're supposed to do when you do a survey, but it's really easy to forget it as you're steamrolling along with your survey. Have people not on your team try out the survey. Really, reread everything. Like, don't try to cram it all into just doing it in a few days. Clarify questions, like don't make questions so broad, such as the one that we early had the complaint. How many items have you digitized? What do you mean by that? Don't make the survey so hard or overwhelming gathering information, or people aren't going to want to fill it out. We don't have the data on how many people might have left when they got to maybe a really long list of software and just like threw up their hands and said, oh, I can't deal with this. We also say, look at any previous data that you have from earlier surveys to see what ways people are answering things, so that you know what questions to ask to direct your questions more. I mean, if nobody ever said XYZ, you probably shouldn't put a big emphasis on a question about it. Don't send it out around the holidays, the fiscal year ending, semester ending. People are just way too busy to deal with yet another survey at that time. And particularly with the pandemic suggestion, not that it can't be used anytime, be kind. Be kind in your text, be kind with the data you're requesting, and put the information that's required on the front page so that folks can look at it and they can prepare and gather the data ahead of time, or figure out, oh, gee, I need to ask this other person to get that information.
One thing that we didn't put on here, but was also we felt important that we did include in our survey, was show how far you are within the actual survey. Because if you don't and you press next and it's ended, more than likely you kind of went through to see what you actually have, and once you submit it, you kind of lose all your entry data, and you have to do it all over again. So make sure that you show how far you are towards getting it completed.
Right, particularly if you're it is a survey that has a lot of data requests in it. If you know that you just have one more question to do, you might just muddle through. Another one of my personal pet peeves is making sure that there's a back button, so that if somebody's filling out a specific question, they're like, oh yeah, I forgot, I wanted to put that in the other one, that they can actually go back. I mean, you might be surprised how many surveys, or maybe not, that I take that there is no back button, so you're not able to go back and fix anything. We have on this last slide here, we have our contacts. Of course, it's Rachel and I that are presenting today. We originally had anticipated that also Jen and John would be with us, but you got us in all our glory. And Rachel, do you have anything final? We definitely want to leave plenty of time for questions, discussion. Of course, we wish we were sitting in the room with you and we could do some different polls and discuss things. But we're open to hear from you.
Just one thing about Jen, if you do have a question for her about the state library's involvement or what they plan to do with their survey data, please be patient. She will be answering questions in June because she will be coming back to the office then. So if you don't hear from her immediately, just give her some time. Yeah, questions?
Marvelous job, ladies. That was fantastic. We do have one question in the Q&A. Please feel free to populate there if you have a question. The question that we have for you is, software and hardware is updated and replaced relatively often. Are there plans and a process to keep the equipment inventory current?
We don't have one yet. That's something that we're going to be looking into. Hopefully we'll be able to repeat the survey every year, every couple of years, just depending on survey fatigue. I know from the public library perspective, our software really didn't change that often. I was in Cleveland for 5 years and our software changed maybe by one piece of equipment. Academic wise, those changes more often. Janet, you can give more information about your experience in Ohio academic scene, but we're hoping to keep it updated, and we're hoping that as people are more willing to claim their equipment and so forth, we'll open up that spreadsheet so they can actually create their own updates there as well.
Yeah, and one thing that we're trying to do, I mean, you might have just think, why are they trying to reinvent the wheel? What we were hearing from the smaller institutions were they would go to look at like the FAGI guidelines or something and really be overwhelmed that they wanted something specific, step-by-step, simplified, perhaps. I mean, I would love something simplified from FAGI. I mean, it's just, yeah. And somebody that they could directly ask, or institution in their region. Ohio has the benefit of almost kind of being a square, even though they like to say it's a heart. So we have, the state is pretty easily chunked out into 5 sections, the central, and then the four points. And folks do tend to kind of stay in their region when they're looking for help.
And if you do have any questions, oh, there's one. Question is, do you feel that you learned anything new from the survey?
I feel like I did, because I didn't realize just how many variations of some of the equipment that we had across Ohio, and just also how much more work we still have to do in Ohio to really get some of our smaller institutions elevated, to get them really going further. Because I thought when I was in Ohio, like we had OHDIG, we had a lot of participation there. So the thought was that we were still getting a lot of engagement, and with the DigiHubs projects, we would have additional resources there, and it's not as far as I had hoped. So that was very much a little more eye-opening for me. And I'm now in Georgia, so I haven't seen it for the last year, but I do think this having OHDIG online as well is also helping, but some institutions are also afraid to ask, how do I actually do this step by step? Because they don't want to look like they're so far behind. So having the survey data also gave them the opportunity to really say, hey, I need step-by-step help, instead of verbalizing that in front of a meeting. So that was very much eye-opening for me and what I learned from it. Janet, did you?
Yeah, a little bit more on Ohio DIG. I have found that we actually seem to get more active participation from the smaller institutions when we were meeting in person, because they were a little less worried about saying that they needed help on a specific thing than in the virtual world. Maybe it seems like too many people are looking. I don't know. And also that we were able to break out in small groups when we were meeting in person, and we're not so much now. I mean, one thing that I experienced that, so I wasn't as surprised on seeing it in the survey, is that I had some public libraries contact me asking for advice and help on digitization, and what they had to work with was basically a photocopier that made PDFs. And they had an audience for the material that they wanted to put out, and they were actively making copies with the equipment that they had. And yeah, so there is still, there's still a gap. It's still somewhat of a, a mysterious thing, especially if you don't have anybody else to ask that you feel comfortable asking. So we're just trying to make things a little more accessible. And we're very fortunate that we have the state library that will act as a free consultant. They just can't say, you should try this software or hardware. And currently our state is able to have participation in the DPLA hub at no charge. Don't know that that will always continue. So if we can get folks on board to making, doing some digitization, then they can get it in the DPLA.
Do we have any additional questions for our presenters today? Looks like maybe not, but thank you both. Great presentation. Thank you for sharing. And then I just want to put a reminder out there to be sure to check out the virtual posters and tours during your downtime. And then we will be sending you in about a week a MAC 2021 survey, which we would like you to fill out. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate
I hope
it.
everybody has a great MAC conference this year.
Indeed.